Hello, welcome to 4-H Live Online Learning. My name is Sarah Havens, and I'm a field specialist in natural resources for the University of Missouri Extension. And today I'm going to talk to you about wildlife habitat in your backyard. So come along with me, I'm going to show you some things, and then we're going to go out and look at my backyard. Let's start with the 4-H pledge. I pledge my head to clearer thinking, my heart to greater loyalty, my hands to larger service, and my health to better living for my club, my community, my country, and my world. Now let's talk about a little bit about wildlife and wildlife habitat. Did you know that plants, shrubs, and trees help trap and hold dust and pollen that can damage human lungs and lessen the amount of chemicals transported to streams? Just 1 acre of trees and shrubs can produce enough oxygen for 18 people every day. Yards and community parks provide habitat for wildlife and can serve as critical areas for wildlife populations. There are things we can do in our own backyards to improve it for wildlife. How do you know if your yard is good habitat? You can look at what you have. A walk through your yard as well as observing wildlife will give you a great idea about what lives in your yard. You can also do things to improve habitat for wildlife. You can plant shrubs or trees that attract wildlife. You can provide food sources through bird feeders or squirrel feeders. Yep, you can even feed the squirrels. What's outside your window? Right now, why don't you look out your window and see what's there? Observation of wildlife can be done from our windows, from our backyards, from our porches. You can watch bird feeders, the canopy of a tree in your yard, or a space that provides shelter such as under outbuildings or along forest lines. These are great places to find wildlife in your backyard. What's out your window? Write down 2 plants or animals that you see outside your window right now. Outside mine, I've seen this morning a black-capped chickadee and a cardinal. Let's observe our yard or neighborhood some more. So what are some things that we can look for in our backyard that indicate that it is a great place for wildlife? So we can look for scenic places, so forests, meadows, lakes, ponds, streams. Special features, so if we have big mature trees, these are great places for things like squirrel nests, bird nests. Raccoons even will use some of our neighborhood trees. Hedgerows, these are the spaces between your yard and maybe the neighbor's yard, or a space between your yard and another open space. We can also look for things like morels in the spring. Who's been finding morels this year? Say sometimes these pop up in our neighborhood and we don't have to go to the woods and look for them. Water. So all wildlife, all living things really need water to survive. What kind of water sources do you have in your yard or nearby? So things like springs, places where you catch fish, or places where you hear frogs. Animals. So we can look on our property and see what animals are close by. Sometimes, depending on the size and location of our property, we'll find things like dens, bird nests, butterflies, or deer trails even. The seasons. So observing your yard throughout the seasons can give us a great indication of what lives there. Not everything is going to be present in every single season. So we can look at right now, the spring flowers are blooming, but they'll soon disappear and give way to summer flowers. We can also look at fall colors. This is a great way for us to know what trees are there. Sounds. It's always great to observe the sounds of your yard. Is there water flowing? Are there songbirds singing or coyotes howling? Smells. Flowers in spring, leaves in fall. These are great ways to observe your yard. You should take notes on what you see. This is just a example of a natural resource rating scale that we use when we assess urban areas, but you could use this too in your yard. Take note of what's there. So are there species of local interest? So can you find birds, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, butterflies, insects? Insects are some of the best wildlife that we can observe in our yard because there's so many that are usually present. We can also do things that improve our yard for insects. So for pollinators in particular, we can plant things like milkweed or native flower species. We can also provide nests, so we can make a bee house that attracts those pollinators. What type of vertical structure and diversity of vegetation do we have in our yard? Do we have lots of different grasses, lots of different trees, lots of different shrubs, or do we have all the same? This makes a big difference in what wildlife is going to use that. Horizontal structure and diversity of vegetation. So again, how far out does it go? Do we have lots of just plain old open grass, or do we have some other things that are planted in there that provide cover, food, protection for wildlife? Patches or clumps of vegetation. So we don't want to have isolated plants, but they need various types and clumps along the way. So for example, if you had a chipmunk that wanted to come into your yard, if it was just a complete open mowed yard, they would be uncomfortable walking across that because they're afraid of predators. But if we have shrubs and bushes and other clumps that make up places they could hide, then they can move into your yard or move towards your feeder if you have a feeder that's aimed at chipmunks. Again, vegetation corridors, these are linkages of plants across the landscape that allow wildlife to move among habitat areas. Even in our urban areas, for some of our large animals like deer, if we can provide them with shelter or corridors where they can move from a forested area through the neighborhood, this helps support those populations. So follow me as I walk through my yard, and we're going to talk about what wildlife habitat I have. Okay, I'm going to start my live backyard habitat, and I kind of live in a unique place. So actually, if you look at my video, right across there is the falls at Bennett Springs State Park. So my husband's the hatchery manager here at the state park. He raises all the trout that they put into the river, and we actually live on site. So this is my yard is part of the state park. But we've done some things in our yard to help improve it for wildlife. So first we're gonna look, so I have kind of a messy looking garden if you look at it today. So it has wild violets and nettle and other things growing in it, as well as daffodils. Dandelions. So I left my dandelions growing because they provide great food for our early pollinators that come out, so our bees that start to come out when it warms up. They really use those a lot for habitat. So I've put out my hummingbird feeders for early hummingbirds, so we should be seeing those any day. So, and then the rest of my garden is kind of random, regular ornamental flowers. The deer do like to eat my hosta when they get a chance. Some other just kind of random habitat. So we have some native plants that we are starting. So this is Eastern Wahoo, so they're getting ready to be put out in the yard. It's still fairly early. So I've left this stump, and it is kind of an eyesore, I'll admit, but it has provided fabulous food for woodpeckers. So we have had several different species of woodpeckers that have come, and they'll eat insects out of that bark or out of that stump. The rest of this garden is planted with various native species, and again, we're still early in the growing season, but in this area I have rose mallow that is a native, and it looks like it's related to hibiscus, so it looks like a large hibiscus. If you look out kind of along our yard and then over in this direction, I have a wood pile that we have left all winter. So we've left that for rabbits, other small mammals to use for cover and shelter. The other thing that we've done to improve habitat in our yard is we did not rake or clean up the leaves this year. So we did this for a reason. So a lot of our insects will overwinter as larvae in those leaves. I know not everybody's an insect fan, but they are important in our food chain. So it takes one group of chickadees, so one couple of chickadees, to raise one clutch of young, about 6,500 caterpillars,
each year in order for them to raise their nest. So it's important for us to keep some of those insects around, even if we don't always like them. So additionally, if you look kind of in the yard, there's lots of kid things. I have 2 children. This is a lilac bush that's kind of planted midway between the forest and our yard, and it provides shelter for wildlife as it comes across or comes through. Also, if you do hear the river from our yard, so that's one of our water resources. But if you listen, there's lots of birds singing this morning, lots of kind of wildlife on the go since it's springtime. We also have several large trees, which again is something that you can't necessarily add to your yard, but if you do have them, maintaining them is important for wildlife and wildlife habitat. Here's another part of my yard. So again, it looks very weedy right now because we've been leaving a lot of our weeds for pollinators, for food for them, and very shortly in the next couple weeks I will start pulling these weeds. If you go through, again, a couple natives, this is Virginia bluebell. So again, a very early blooming flower in Missouri, which is great for our native pollinators, so they have an early new food source. Also in here I have hostas, which make a fabulous food source for the deer and are very decorative. What you can't see here, but is here, is milkweed. So I have a whole bunch of swamp milkweed that's planted in this garden, and this is where all my monarchs come and lay their eggs, and we hatched out about 250 monarch butterflies last year with our swamp milkweed that we have. So again, early in the year, it's not popped out yet, but once it starts coming out, it'll feed our monarch habitat and help with that. Another important native species that we have here, so I have a sassafras tree that's a native. So this will provide, again, valuable food sources for native caterpillars and native butterflies.
So now that I've shown you a little bit about the habitat that I have in my yard, feel free to share in the comments some things that you have in your yard that are great for wildlife or attract wildlife.